Massachusetts is one of the most important places in American history, not because it was always powerful, but because so many defining ideas of the United States were born there. Long before the state existed, long before Europeans arrived, the land that would become Massachusetts was already home to thriving indigenous societies. These people lived off the forests, rivers, and coastline, shaping the land through hunting, farming, fishing, and trade. Their history stretches back thousands of years and forms the foundation of everything that came later. The first people of Massachusetts belonged to several Native American nations, most notably the Massachusetts, Wampanoag, Nipmuc, and Nauset peoples. They lived in organized communities with political leadership, spiritual traditions, and deep knowledge of the environment. They grew crops like corn, beans, and squash, hunted deer and small animals, and relied heavily on fishing and shellfish along the Atlantic coast. Rivers such as the Charles and Connecticut served as trade routes, connecting tribes across New England. Life followed the seasons, and survival depended on balance with nature rather than domination over it. These indigenous societies were not primitive or chaotic. They had laws, diplomacy, conflict resolution, and long-standing alliances. Leadership often came from respected elders or sachems, and decisions were made with the community in mind. Their world, however, was about to change in ways they could not imagine. In the early 1600s, European ships began appearing along the coast, bringing not only new people, but also disease, religion, weapons, and an entirely different worldview. Before large-scale English settlement began, disease devastated native populations. Smallpox, measles, and influenza, brought unknowingly by Europeans, killed tens of thousands of indigenous people across New England. Some villages lost over half their population within a few years. This massive loss weakened tribal structures and created power vacuums that later made colonization easier. When English settlers finally arrived in large numbers, they encountered lands that appeared empty or underused, not realizing those spaces had once been full of life. In 1620, a small group of English religious separatists arrived aboard the Mayflower and settled in Plymouth. These settlers, later known as the Pilgrims, were fleeing religious persecution and seeking the freedom to practice their beliefs. Their arrival marked one of the most famous moments in American history, but their survival depended heavily on indigenous help. The Wampanoag people, particularly a man named Squanto, taught them how to grow crops, fish, and survive the harsh New England winters. Without that assistance, the Plymouth colony likely would not have survived. Just 10 years later, a much larger and more influential wave of settlers arrived. In 1630, the Puritans founded the Massachusetts Bay Colony, establishing towns like Boston, Salem, and Cambridge. Unlike the Pilgrims, the Puritans did not want religious freedom for everyone. They wanted to create a society based strictly on their interpretation of Christianity. Massachusetts quickly became a deeply religious colony where church membership and moral behavior shaped every part of life. The Puritan leaders believed they were creating a city upon a hill, a model society that would inspire the world. Laws were strict, behavior was monitored, and dissent was punished. People who challenged Puritan authority, including religious dissenters, women accused of witchcraft, and those with different beliefs, were often banished, imprisoned, or worse. Massachusetts became both a place of opportunity and repression, a contradiction that would define much of its history. As the colony grew, conflict with Native Americans became inevitable. English settlers expanded farmland, fenced land that had once been shared, and imposed foreign laws. Tensions exploded in the mid-1600s during a brutal conflict known as King Philip's War. The war devastated both native and colonial communities, but its impact on indigenous peoples was catastrophic. Entire villages were destroyed, thousands were killed, and native resistance in Massachusetts was largely crushed. After the war, English control over the region became nearly absolute. By the late 1600s and early 1700s, Massachusetts had become a powerful colonial center. Boston grew into one of the most important ports in British North America. Trade, shipbuilding, fishing, and commerce fueled economic growth. Wealth accumulated, education expanded, and institutions such as Harvard College, founded in 1636, began shaping intellectual life. Massachusetts became a colony where ideas mattered, where literacy was widespread, and where political debate was common. That culture of debate would eventually place Massachusetts at the center of rebellion against British rule. As Britain increased taxes and tightened control after the French and Indian War, resistance grew strongest in Massachusetts. Events like the Boston Massacre and the Boston Tea Party were not accidents. They were the result of decades of political tension, economic pressure, and a growing belief that local people should govern themselves. By the time the American Revolution began, Massachusetts was already a hotbed of resistance. The first battles of the war were fought in Lexington and Concord. Ordinary farmers and shopkeepers took up arms against the most powerful empire in the world. Massachusetts did not just witness the birth of the United States, it helped force it into existence. As English settlements expanded across Massachusetts, tension with Native American tribes grew steadily. The early years of cooperation slowly turned into conflict as settlers claimed more land for farming, towns, and trade. Indigenous communities saw their hunting grounds shrink and their way of life threatened. Treaties were often unfair or broken entirely, and misunderstandings between cultures became common. By the mid-1600s, these tensions erupted into one of the bloodiest conflicts in colonial American history. In 1675, King Philip's War began. Led by Metacomet, the Wampanoag leader known to the English as King Philip. The war spread rapidly across Massachusetts and neighboring colonies, involving native tribes and colonial militias in brutal fighting. Towns were burned, farms destroyed, and thousands of people on both sides were killed. Entire villages disappeared, and the war left deep scars across the region. By the time the conflict ended in 1676, native resistance had been largely crushed, and English control over Massachusetts was firmly established. After the war, Massachusetts entered a period of tighter English control. The English crown became increasingly concerned about the independence of its colonies. In 1684, the original Massachusetts Bay Colony Charter was revoked, and the colony was placed under direct royal authority. This change angered colonists who valued self-government. Religious freedom also declined as royal governors tried to weaken Puritan control. Although the original charter was later replaced, Massachusetts would never again be as independent as it had been in its earliest years. The late 16s were also marked by fear and superstition, most famously during the Salem witch trials of 1692. A wave of panic swept through the colony after accusations of witchcraft were made against local residents. Courts accepted questionable evidence, including visions and rumors. More than 200 people were accused, and 20 were executed. The trials exposed the dangers of mass hysteria and extreme religious belief. In later years, Massachusetts leaders admitted the trials were a tragic mistake. As the 17s began, Massachusetts grew into one of the most important colonies in British North America. Boston became a major port city, connecting the colony to Europe, the Caribbean, and Africa. Shipbuilding, fishing, and trade fueled economic growth. Education also expanded, with Harvard College becoming a center for learning and leadership. The colony developed a strong sense of identity and pride, shaped by religion, commerce, and community involvement. However, relations with Britain began to worsen after the French and Indian War ended in 1763. Britain, heavily in debt, decided to tax the colonies to pay for defense costs. Massachusetts became the center of resistance. New taxes, such as the Stamp Act and Townshend Acts, were deeply unpopular. Colonists argued that taxation without representation violated their rights as English citizens. Protests, boycotts, and public demonstrations became common, especially in Boston. Tensions exploded in 1770 during the Boston Massacre, when British soldiers fired into a crowd, killing 5 colonists. The event shocked the colonies and fueled anti-British anger. Just 3 years later, the Boston Tea Party took place when colonists dumped British tea into Boston Harbor to protest taxation. Britain responded with harsh punishments known as the Intolerable Acts, closing Boston's port and limiting local government. These actions only strengthened colonial resistance. In 1775, the American Revolution began in Massachusetts. The first battles were fought at Lexington and Concord, when British troops attempted to seize colonial weapons. Militia forces successfully pushed the British back to Boston. Soon after, the Battle of Bunker Hill showed that colonial fighters could stand up to the British Army. Massachusetts became the heart of the Revolutionary movement, supplying soldiers, leaders, and ideas that shaped the fight for independence. During the war, Massachusetts faced hardship, shortages, and economic instability. Many towns struggled to support soldiers and families. Despite these challenges, the state played a key role in achieving independence. In 1780, Massachusetts adopted its own constitution, written largely by John Adams. It became one of the oldest functioning constitutions in the world and influenced the structure of the U.S. Constitution. After independence, Massachusetts entered a new era as part of the United States. The early years were not easy. Economic struggles led to unrest, most notably Shays' Rebellion in 1786. Farmers angry over debt and taxes took up arms against the state government. The uprising was eventually crushed, but it exposed weaknesses in the national government and helped lead to the creation of a stronger federal system. As the 1800s approached, Massachusetts transformed rapidly. Industrialization changed daily life as factories replaced small farms and workshops. Textile mills powered by rivers appeared in towns like Lowell and Lawrence. These mills employed thousands of workers, including women and children. Massachusetts became one of the first industrial centers in America, leading economic change across the nation. As the 19th century progressed, Massachusetts became one of the most important engines of American industrial growth. Rivers such as the Merrimack and Connecticut powered textile mills that transformed towns like Lowell, Lawrence, and Holyoke into industrial centers. These factories drew thousands of workers, including young women from rural New England who became known as mill girls. For the first time in American history, large numbers of women earned wages outside the home, creating early conversations about labor rights, independence, and social reform. While factory life provided opportunity, it also brought harsh working conditions, long hours, and low pay, sparking some of the earliest labor protests in the nation. At the same time, Massachusetts became a magnet for immigrants. Irish immigrants fleeing famine arrived in large numbers during the 1840s, followed by Italians, Eastern Europeans, and others later in the century. These new arrivals reshaped the cultural and social fabric of the state, especially in Boston. Immigrants often faced discrimination, poverty, and dangerous working conditions, yet they built strong communities, churches, and labor organizations. Neighborhoods like South Boston, East Boston, and the North End became centers of immigrant life, contributing lasting traditions, cuisines, and identities that remain part of Massachusetts today. Massachusetts also stood at the center of the national debate over slavery. Although slavery had effectively ended in the state by the late 18th century, Massachusetts became one of the strongest centers of abolitionist thought. Figures such as William Lloyd Garrison used Boston as a platform to argue for the immediate end of slavery, publishing influential anti-slavery newspapers and organizing public lectures. The state was a critical stop on the Underground Railroad, helping enslaved people escape to freedom in Canada. This activism made Massachusetts a target of controversy and violence, but it also placed the state firmly on the moral front lines of American history. When the Civil War erupted in 1861, Massachusetts responded immediately. It was one of the first states to mobilize troops for the Union Army. The famous 54th Massachusetts Infantry Regiment, one of the first African American units to fight for the Union, became a symbol of courage and sacrifice. Their bravery at Fort Wagner helped change public opinion about black soldiers and paved the way for wider participation of African Americans in the military. Massachusetts factories also supplied weapons, uniforms, and equipment, making the state essential to the Union war effort. After the Civil War, Massachusetts entered a period of rapid urbanization and modernization. Boston expanded dramatically, filling in marshlands and extending its boundaries. Advances in transportation, including streetcars and railroads, allowed cities to grow outward, creating early suburbs. Education continued to be a central focus, with Massachusetts maintaining some of the strongest public school systems in the nation. Institutions like Harvard and MIT gained international recognition, attracting scholars, scientists, and innovators from around the world. However, industrial growth also brought new challenges. Overcrowded housing, pollution, and economic inequality became serious problems in urban areas. Reform movements emerged in response, pushing for safer working conditions, child labor laws, and improved public health. Massachusetts became a testing ground for progressive reforms that would later spread across the country. Settlement houses, labor unions, and civic organizations worked to improve living conditions for the working class and immigrant communities. By the early 20th century, Massachusetts had firmly established itself as a leader in industry, education, and political thought. During World War I, the state supported the national war effort through manufacturing and military service. After the war, however, economic shifts began to weaken traditional industries such as textiles. Competition from the southern United States and overseas caused factory closures and job losses, forcing many communities to adapt or decline. This economic transition marked the beginning of a long shift away from manufacturing toward education, technology, and services. The Great Depression of the 1930s hit Massachusetts hard. Unemployment soared, factories shut down, and families struggled to survive. In response, New Deal programs funded public works projects across the state, including roads, schools, parks, and public buildings. These programs not only provided jobs, but also reshaped the physical landscape of Massachusetts. Infrastructure built during this period remains in use today, a lasting legacy of federal intervention during crisis. World War II once again transformed Massachusetts. Shipyards, arms factories, and research institutions played major roles in the Allied war effort. Boston became a key naval center, while scientists in Massachusetts contributed to technological advancements that helped shape modern warfare. The war also accelerated social change, drawing women into the workforce and expanding opportunities for minorities. When the war ended, Massachusetts emerged stronger, but faced the challenge of redefining its economy in a rapidly changing world. The post-war period marked a turning point. Traditional manufacturing continued to decline, but Massachusetts adapted by investing in higher education, scientific research, and healthcare. The Cold War fueled growth in defense-related industries and technology. Universities became engines of innovation, producing breakthroughs in medicine, engineering, and computing. This shift laid the foundation for Massachusetts to become a global leader in knowledge-based industries. Social change accelerated during the mid-20th century. Massachusetts played an important role in the civil rights movement, supporting desegregation, voting rights, and equal opportunity. Boston, however, also experienced racial tensions, particularly during school desegregation efforts in the 1970s. These conflicts exposed deep divisions, but also forced the state to confront issues of inequality and justice. Over time, Massachusetts worked toward more inclusive policies, though challenges persisted. By the late 20th century, Massachusetts had reinvented itself once again. The rise of biotechnology, information technology, and advanced healthcare transformed the state's economy. Areas around Boston and Cambridge became global innovation hubs, attracting talent and investment from around the world. Companies spun out of universities, blending academic research with entrepreneurship. This transformation helped Massachusetts recover from industrial decline and secure a new role in the global economy. Culturally, Massachusetts continued to influence the nation. Literature, politics, science, and education remained central to the state's identity. The legacy of early American ideals combined with modern innovation created a unique balance between tradition and progress. Historic sites coexisted with cutting-edge research labs, reflecting the state's ability to honor its past while shaping the future. As the 20th century came to a close, Massachusetts stood as one of the most educated, economically diverse, and historically rich states in the nation. Its journey from indigenous land to colonial experiment, from revolutionary center to industrial powerhouse, and from manufacturing decline to innovation leader, showed a pattern of resilience and reinvention. The forces that shaped Massachusetts, education, reform, activism, and adaptability, continued to define its character. Massachusetts entered the late 20th century carrying both enormous strengths and serious challenges. The industries that once powered its economy, textiles, manufacturing, and shipbuilding, were declining rapidly. Factories closed, jobs disappeared, and many working-class communities struggled to adapt. Cities like Lowell, Lawrence, and Fall River, which had once thrived during the Industrial Revolution, faced unemployment and population loss. At the same time, Boston and its surrounding suburbs began transforming into centers of education, medicine, finance, and technology. This shift created economic growth, but it also deepened inequality between regions and social classes. Higher education became one of Massachusetts' greatest strengths. Universities such as Harvard, MIT, Tufts, Boston University, and Northeastern expanded their influence, attracting students, researchers, and investment from around the world. Scientific innovation flourished, especially in engineering, medicine, and computer science. Research hospitals and biotech firms formed strong partnerships with universities, turning the Boston area into a global hub for healthcare and life sciences. This transformation helped Massachusetts move away from heavy industry and toward a knowledge-based economy. Immigration continued to shape the state's identity in powerful ways. New waves of immigrants arrived from Latin America, the Caribbean, Asia, Africa, and the Middle East. Communities from Haiti, the Dominican Republic, Brazil, Vietnam, China, and Cape Verde became deeply rooted in Massachusetts cities. These immigrants revitalized neighborhoods, opened businesses, and added new cultural traditions. Massachusetts, once shaped mainly by European immigration, became one of the most diverse states in the nation. This diversity strengthened the economy, but also required new approaches to education, housing, and social services. Politically, Massachusetts became known for progressive leadership and strong civic engagement. The state expanded protections for workers, invested heavily in public education, and supported healthcare reform. In 2006, Massachusetts passed landmark healthcare legislation that greatly expanded access to insurance, becoming a model for later national reforms. This reflected a long tradition in the state of valuing public welfare and government responsibility. Massachusetts voters often supported policies focused on education, healthcare, civil rights, and environmental protection. At the same time, Massachusetts played a key role in advancing civil rights and social equality. The state was among the first to legalize same-sex marriage in 2004, following a decision by the Massachusetts Supreme Judicial Court. This historic moment had national impact and helped accelerate the broader movement for LGBTQ+ rights across the United States. The decision reflected Massachusetts' long history of challenging social norms and expanding definitions of freedom and equality. Environmental awareness also grew as a major issue. Coastal communities faced rising sea levels, erosion, and stronger storms linked to climate change. Massachusetts invested in renewable energy, offshore wind projects, and environmental conservation. The state recognized that its long coastline, historic towns, and fishing industries were at risk if climate change was not addressed. These efforts reflected a broader understanding that Massachusetts' future depended on balancing economic growth with environmental responsibility. Boston remained the cultural and economic center of the state, but regional identities stayed strong. Western Massachusetts preserved its rural character and agricultural traditions. Cape Cod and the islands balanced tourism with environmental preservation. Former industrial cities worked to reinvent themselves through education, arts, and technology. This regional diversity gave Massachusetts a complex identity, both modern and historic, urban and rural, global and local. Education continued to be one of the state's defining features. Massachusetts consistently ranked among the top states in public education performance. Investments in schools, libraries, and higher education reflected a belief that knowledge was the foundation of democracy and economic success. This belief dated back to the Puritan emphasis on literacy and learning, showing how deeply history continued to influence modern priorities. Despite its many successes, Massachusetts also faced ongoing challenges. Housing costs rose sharply, especially in Greater Boston, making it difficult for working families to remain in the area. Economic inequality persisted along racial and regional lines. Public transportation systems struggled to keep up with demand. These issues sparked debates about development, affordability, and fairness, reminding residents that progress required constant effort and reform. Massachusetts' influence extended far beyond its borders. Its universities educated global leaders. Its scientific research advanced medicine, technology, and environmental science. Its political ideas shaped national conversations. Its history was taught in classrooms around the world as a foundation of American democracy. From the Mayflower Compact to modern civil rights decisions, Massachusetts repeatedly stood at the center of defining moments in U.S. history. Today, Massachusetts is a state where the past and present exist side by side. Colonial streets run alongside modern research labs. Historic town halls stand near biotech startups. Traditions dating back centuries coexist with rapidly changing technology and culture. The state's story is one of constant reinvention, shaped by conflict, innovation, immigration, and the pursuit of ideals. From indigenous homelands to colonial settlements, from revolution to industrial power, from social reform to global innovation, Massachusetts has never been a quiet or passive place. It has been a testing ground for ideas, a battleground for rights, and a leader in shaping the American identity. Its history is not just a regional story, but a national one, woven into the fabric of the United States itself. Massachusetts continues to move forward, shaped by its people, its values, and its deep sense of responsibility to both history and the future. The same spirit that fueled revolution, education, and reform still defines the state today. And as new generations build upon this legacy, Massachusetts remains a place where ideas matter, voices are heard, and history is always being made. If you enjoyed this story, like the video, subscribe for more history, share it with others, and comment below what I should cover next.